Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Bhima. He's our new 5-star single target Lancer from the Paper Moon campaign. And again, he is a permanent Lancer, so a very interesting addition. He's drawn by Paco, and I have seen a lot of discussion on him already. I think he's got a really interesting kit, particularly with regards to his overcharge, which I think is going to be something you're really going to want to maximize. He definitely has some good attack power, and just kind of starting off looking at his kit here, again, you can see he's at 12.3, which is not a bad number by any means for a 5-star. His HP values here is only at about 14k, but again, that's not too bad, and I think you guys will see he's okay considering the kit that he actually ends up having. His attribute here is Sky attribute. He is, again, going to have sort of the standard Lancer, Star Gen, and Absorption. I think he's actually one below average for Lancer, Star Absorption there. But again, little fluctuations like that are not too big of a deal. It's just something to take note of. He has a 0.72 NP charge attack rate, which is very high compared to what we normally are seeing nowadays, which is a lot of 0.5s rather than 0.7s. So, and then he also ends up having the 4% NP charge defense, which again, another good thing to have because it just means that he's getting an extra percent for every single hit of every single attack that he gets hit with. And again, his death rate here is pretty average right here at 28%. He is lawful good alignment, male, Brynhilder's beloved, divine hominide, servant, humanoid, and Seven Knights servant, weak to enema elish. So pretty much a standard lineup there. I think the only really the notable things there are going to be Brynhilder's beloved and divine. Those are sort of very actionable traits where, again, people can either buff it or do extra damage to him based off of it. And so it's a really nice thing to take note of those. He does have our standard Lancer deck, actually. It's been a while since we've seen one of these. He's double buster, double quick. And that's kind of how a lot of Lancers started out. So this is where, again, his NP gain rate being so strong makes a lot of sense because he doesn't have the second arts card. And again, all of his hit counts here are actually average or above in the case of the in the case of the 4-hit quick. So not a bad one to have there. And certainly this will make him pretty good at star generation with all of those, again, hit counts on the card. But otherwise, nothing too much to write home about here, other than the fact that, again, not having that second arts card might hurt him for situations that he needs to actually card for his MP game. Still, I think in a system nowadays where we start using a lot of Koyan Skayas, you actually get the 10% charge by using Buster cards with her buffs, so I'm not sure it's that big of a deal. It just would be something that you maybe don't want to find yourself in those situations, but that's pretty normal anyways for Buster with that regard. Now, again, looking at his active skills here, his first skill will grant himself Guts 1 status 3 turns. So again, any concerns about his overall survivability kind of go downhill here since you actually end up, again, having a hard survival skill. And one of the things that I do like about Guts is even though you will take damage, even though you will get knocked down really low, having a Guts is something that doesn't get removed by defensive buff removal. So that only works with like defense buffs, and Guts is not considered a actual defense buff. It's considered a restorative buff, a healing buff. So it doesn't fall under the same category of things that normally remove that. So that can be really nice. Again, though, if you're coming up against an enemy that has buff block or an enemy that basically has the capability to actually remove all buffs rather than just defensive buffs, that's something you're going to want to be aware of. Certainly the buff block is also a little sour here because he does have the ability to cleanse, but it happens after the Guts, so you're not going to get that ability if you pop it right away. So if he already has the buff block on him, you're just shit out of luck. The good thing, though, here, too, is he also manages to have, again, a 30% charge here, all on a 6-turn cooldown, which again, with the double Koyan Skaya setups nowadays, means that you can actually end up getting back to this skill. So you can functionally pop the skill on turn 1 and turn 3, and thus you can basically get 60% charge out of the skill instead of just 30%. So it's really, really nice for him, and this does actually open up the possibility of starting with a 50% CE if you wanted to make him NP 3 times in a row. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind here as we go through them. His second skill here is Buster Performance for 3 turns of 30%. This is actually a pretty standard sort of multi-turn steroid that we see for a lot of people. We have started to see some units get a 50% Buster steroid elongated into 3 turns, but those tend to be units that really are in dire need of improvement. They're sort of year 1 units that didn't scale as well, didn't have all the extra bells and whistles that some of the other units have. And I don't think Bhima is going to need that too hard here, at least not for a while. But again, I think you'll see his damage is actually pretty adequate. So taking a look at the rest of this here, he also has crit damage for 3 turns of an additional 30%. Always welcome, again, especially with the ability to manufacture stars now in the Buster system. You can basically flood the party and make sure that cards do crit. So I do think having any sort of extra crit damage here is just going to make him perform even better. And then he also has stars himself, again, an additional up to 15 right there, just on activation of the skill. And given the fact that this is all on a 6-turn cooldown, you can get back to it yet again. So I'm going to say this is definitely a nice thing, because it's, again, going to be something that you're probably going to pop turn 1, and then you're going to get it back on turn 3. And that means you're going to have overlap of the 30% Buster up and 30% crit up, basically allowing you to double those for even more, again, crit damage and Buster card damage, as well as NP damage potentially there. And then as we get to the third skill here, it's going to be the increase to his own attack for 3 turns of 30%. And again, remember, this is all on a 6-turn cooldown, so you get to do this one multiple times as well. It's really good to see low cooldowns on a Buster unit, because it just means that you're getting everything back again if you put them in the right proper setup. Now, again, he's going to grant himself on attack activate buff for 3 turns, and that's basically going to be increasing his own critical damage by 10% for 3 turns whenever he attacks with a quick card. So basically, when he uses a quick card, that is going to confer a 10% crit damage for 3 turns to himself every single time he uses a quick card over the span of 3 turns. Not bad, especially considering card lock memes can open this up, or again, if you put him in a solo environment. This is actually pretty similar to Ashvataman. He has another similar like effect, and so it's really interesting to see that, again, with some of the Indian servants, they're keeping them at least similar in terms of design. And you can also see he also gets another on attack activate buff here for his Buster cards, which is going to give him 5 critical stars each time he does. So this is just going to flood him even more, and this does mean that if you are trying to operate him in a solo environment without maybe the supports, that he has the ability to generate stars himself and be able to get back to that and, you know, be able to use that for harder critting and everything. So definitely a nice thing to have in that regard. So he's going to be someone that functions pretty nice both in and out of a support setup. And I think the only thing that you guys got to be worried about is, again, just the fact that he has a Guts as his only real survival mechanism. And again, I do think it's a very powerful skill. So his passive skills here, he gets Magic Resistance C, he gets Divinity B here. So again, a little bit of extra debuff resistance for not, you know, getting debuffed as much from enemies that are trying to debilitate him. But, you know, it is what it is. They're still probably going to land a lot of their stuff, especially since, you know, challenge quests have a tendency to really stack and layer a lot of debuffs on you. And then the Divinity is just an extra 175 to each one of his attacks. It's literally just flat damage additive right at the end of the formula there. So it's just a nice extra thing to have, but it's not the end-all be-all that I think some people think it is. And then he has Naga Poisonous Fang A here, which grants himself poison debuff immunity. This is probably his best passive, just because it's just a little bit of, hey, I'm going to be really useful in these sorts of situations type of deal. I really like the passive skills like this because they just give you that scenario where you go, oh, okay, this is a poison heavy boss. Now I can take that guy. He's going to absolutely destroy that. So again, let's say it's someone like, again, Robin Hood. Immediately, you don't have to worry too much about facing him, because if Robin Hood's entire gimmick revolves around poison, Bhima's not going to get poisoned, so it's a really good way of negating some of the more annoying gimmicks of certain fights. Now, on the screen here, you guys can see the third skill here for Bhima, which is the Anti-Berserker attack damage aptitude, and that is actually a really good one. Normally, I like to point this out. Again, this is a huge one with regards to getting a little bit of extra firepower for a unit. Whenever I see a unit that has Anti-Berserker, I have a tendency to rank it fairly high in terms of usability for that. So I think the only concern here is that Bhima probably is going to be someone that really wants his mana loading, especially because he is a 30% charger. And so the way this is going to kind of work for a lot of charge setups is you're going to use 30% on turn 1 for his charge. He's going to start out with the mana loading anyways. And then let's just go ahead and jump to turn 2 here and say, well, if it's double Koyanskaya setup, there's your 50% right there. That means he's going to, for turn 3, get back to an additional 30% charge. The problem with that sort of scenario is we have to fill in the gap. So what you're probably going to need to fill this in is another sort of support unit there, and that's probably going to be Oberon. You're going to need an Oberon for that final wave in order to allow him to have enough. And then from there, what you're going to do is you're basically going to start Bhima out with a 50% charge C. But certainly if you're not 3-turning, maybe you're just trying to boss kill or something like that, you can start him from 0. But again, I do think that having the mana loading, the extra 20% right there in the front end, is actually going to be useful. It's going to allow him to 3-turn with a better craft essence than he would otherwise be able to. And so it's something I think you guys should really take into consideration. So to me, mana loading is probably my number 1 concern here, with, again, a close second place here to the third append being Anti-Berserker. Now, as you guys can see, the Noble Phantasm here is going to be a 5-hit single target buster, but you'll notice a little extra addition here, and that's that the OC grants an extra 5 hits. Now, because it's buster, we don't care too much about this. Overkill is not a huge thing for, again, buster cards, as all that's really going to help it do is the extra hits essentially allow you to get more star generation and more NP generation, and you're probably not going to get that much anyways with a, again, buster NP. But hey, it's something. It's a little bit extra. It's basically doubling his hit count, so there's nothing too bad there. And it does mean that he's going to have an easier time basically of hitting overkill. So definitely nice in that regard. But again, you guys can see he increases his own critical damage by 50% for 3 turns, activating first. So certainly a nice thing to see. And he's also going to remove one enemy's debuffs. So, or sorry, not debuffs, buffs. So again, we just got done talking about how Guts can't be removed by defensive debuff removal, but it can be removed by all buff removal. That is exactly what Bhima's gonna do, which is a really nice thing, frankly. I actually do like the fact that, again, this is going to allow him to just carve right through people, because all of this is before damage. So you're not going to stop Bhima from dealing damage to you, not unless you have buff removal resistance, which most of the time the AI doesn't. The only reason that they're going to not have their buffs removed is probably because they're an unremovable buff by virtue of it being a challenge quest. So that is something you have to pay attention to, but obviously in situations where that's not applicable, or maybe the boss still has a bunch of annoying effects besides the unremovable buff, Bhima is still going to be a really great option for you in that regard. And this does help him stand out from some of the other Lancers, especially the single target ones there, as again, this is going to be something that he has that they don't. So looking at his overcharge effect though here, I think this is something that you guys will really want to pay attention to, and that's that he just gets a extremely strong modifier here for each rank of overcharge that Bhima gets. Now, you'll notice he had no overcharge in his kit, so I think one of the things that you're going to want to try to do is find some way of getting him overcharge. There is obviously now a Mystic code that can grant overcharge on JP. There is also going to be someone like Koyanskaya of Darkness that can grant 2 ranks of overcharge, or even someone like Reigns that can give it with her NP. So I do think there are ways that you can get to overcharge, but I think probably the best and the easiest way without sacrificing a proper support setup is probably going to be from your craft essences. So taking a quick look at that, again, just for some easy recommendations here, obviously cranking is a really nice one. Sort of the predecessor that you guys have right now is aerial drive. This is the one that you guys should already have and will be getting if you don't have here on NA, because again, this one comes back with the Halloween sort of 3-in-1 event. But again, most JP players should have aerial drive at minimum. Cranking, though, will happen next year on NA. That's going to come from the Bunyan collab event, so all the JP players should have this as well, as long as they've been playing for, you know, again, a little bit more than a year at this point. But certainly this one's a really strong one, because again, it's going to be all attack scaling just like aerial drive. They both start at 50% gauge, but the difference here is you have a little bit of an edge to MP damage. You lose 2% buster performance over aerial drive with this, but you gain 5% NP damage, which again scales better with Oberon anyways. So that's a really, really nice sort of benefit to cranking in that regard. It's just a tiny little bit of power creep in terms of CE. And both of them are welfare craft essences. Both of them are really good and useful. But you're going to say, well, Cad, there was no overcharge with that. And you'd be right. And that's the big thing that I'm going to point out here. So coming down the line here with the Chaldea Fairy Knight Cup, if you guys were lucky enough to roll in that, roll for an MLB copy of this, Apex is a fantastic craft essence. It is all attack scaling, buster performance of 10%, 50% gauge, and 2 stages of overcharge one time. Here's the problem with this. One, because it's only one time, that would get you to 3%, but it's going to be on the lead NP. And if you're trying to 3-turn with Bhima, that probably means that it's not going to apply to the final NP that you actually need to do a lot of damage. But maybe it's just a one-off boss kill, so maybe you can start it out with something like Apex. And again, that's where other things like, say, Rising Mud Rain may come into the picture here, as again, this is just 0% starting charge, and just going to allow you to have, again, something else. And there are numerous other craft essences that allow you to start out with Buster, or again, NP overcharge. So there are things that you guys can do to sort of synergize with Bhima. Just make sure that, again, you're considering the overcharge there, because there's a lot of damage to be won in regards to his case. So just taking a look at his overall damage output here, at NP1, he kind of looks a little lackluster. But do keep in mind that, again, his overcharge is going to allow him even more modifiers, and that is not reflected here, because this is a base 0 overcharge. And again, as you guys can see, he gets 0% modifier at rank 1. So it's only rank 2 and onward that you're really going to be able to take advantage of this. But another one of those ways that you guys can do this, simply putting Bhima's NP after someone else's. That's another way that you guys can easily get ranks of overcharge. So again, I do think Bhima is going to be someone that's going to scale really well down the line, even though he's not necessarily top dog in terms of damage. And again, the ability for him to be able to remove buffs for damage is always going to be a strong consideration. Also, don't get bent out of shape about the numbers on this list. Remember, they are neutral numbers. They also consider each unit's own buffs at rank 10, but no external buffs applied to them, no Mystic Code, no support buffs, and no craft essence. So again, let me know what you guys think of Bhima and whether or not you're going to be excited for him. I'm sure some of you will, since he's a Paco drawn servant. And I'll be curious to read your comments, and I will see you guys for the next one.